Cindy and Kate Liljedahl join us today to talk to us about the importance of adventures, especially having adventures when we're retired and we're heading really deep into that grandparent age. It's great to have family adventures, and as Curt and Cindy will tell us, they don't all have to be huge adventures. But just being able to bring the family together, do something unique, is something that really builds bonds, creates memories, and strengthens the family unit. So you're going to enjoy this conversation. So stay tuned. Hello and welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is your host, Greg Payne, coming at you from Studio 12. This podcast is about being the best possible grandpa you can be, focusing on what it is to be a grandpa and how we can all share that experience together for our grandchildren. Before we get started, I wanted to remind you about my children's book, My Grandpa's Grandpa. You can find this book on my website as well as over on Amazon. The other item, too, that I want to remind you about is our relationship with More Than Grand. Now, Dee Dee Moore has done a great job in building a lot of awesome resources for new grandparents and new parents so that they can start to get on the same page, build and strengthen their relationships, as well as being able to just create a plan, create expectations about how everybody's going to pitch in to support this new grandchild in their life. So be sure to check out the affiliate links and go over to More Than Grand and check out the awesome resources and community that Dee Dee has over there. Now, without further ado, let's jump into this fun conversation with Curt and Cindy and talk about adventures and their memories of adventures with their grandparents. Hi, Cindy. Hi, Curt. Welcome to the
Hi.
Cool Grandpa Podcast.
Well, thank you. We appreciate you asking us to join.
That's right. And cool grandmas out there.
Yeah, cool grandmas.
Oh, yeah. We've got quite a few cool grandmas that listen in.
Oh, that's good. That's great.
One of the things that I really enjoy asking about is learning about what your experience was like when you found out that you were going to be grandparents for the first time, because everybody has a wide range of experiences with this.
Well, I'll let Cindy answer first.
I think ours was like, finally. We've been waiting a long time, but we were late parents too. I mean, we were 30 and 35 when we had our kids. So, of course, they're going to follow after us and be parents later on in their lives, not real early. So it was a thrill.
Good. And like we were talking about, everybody has this wide range of experiences with what's going on with, sometimes you can't wait that it's finally happened. And then, other times in my situation, it was like, wait a second, I'm not a grandpa. I can't possibly be old enough. But then I think we all know those statistics is the average age for a grandfather is around 52. And then I had to look around and go, okay, I guess I am about average when it comes to this.
Oh, I guess we were above average.
Yeah, we're a little late
Yeah.
to the table there.
But I guess my reaction was, and this sounds horrible, that
Oh, don't say that.
my daughter's doing what with the boy? Yes,
I
they've
knew
been
that
married.
was coming.
Yes, they've been married 4 years, but it's still tough, that first one.
That is not good.
No, I was thrilled. And just like when we had our own kids, we didn't care whether it was a boy or a girl. And we were pretty excited about it.
That's awesome. It's such a change too. I think that when it hits us that all of a sudden we've stepped into roles that we've previously have seen either, our own grandparents fulfilling, or it's been older people that have been in our lives where it's like, well, it makes sense that these folks are grandparents, but like, I'll never be a grandparent. It's almost like being 18 and realizing, I'm never going to be 35. I mean, these 35-year-olds, they don't know what's going on. It's old, and the next thing you wake up and you go, man, I wish I was 35 again.
All right.
That's
right.
true.
Yeah, and Cindy and I talked about that. We've had a lot of role models in our life, both our grandparents, our parents, and, our brothers and sisters. and you see what you want to be like and what you don't want to be like. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, well, and that's one reason too I started this podcast, was to make sure that if people hadn't had a good role model as far as a grandfather, because not everybody has a relationship with their grandfathers, that at least it's a place where people can come and hear different stories, realize that there's not one way to do this role, that there's not one perfect situation, but that, hey, here's a group of men and a group of women that are being awesome grandparents, and these are some of the things that they're doing.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, one of the things that really jumped out at me when we were getting connected is having this mindset of adventure and retirement. And what I'd love to do is find out a little bit more. Was this something that you've always kind of had, that you were always seeking out adventures throughout your life together? Or was it something that started to develop as you two were starting to get closer to retirement?
I think that both of us kind of were like the black sheep of our families.
Yeah.
You know, we're the ones that moved 1,800 miles away and came home just, maybe once a year or whatever. And so we had a lot more opportunity to spend our vacations on adventures because we didn't have that family to go to, right? Because they were too far away. So we spent every Thanksgiving camping, and we went, to Europe in the summers and stuff like that because we could, and we did. So we've always been adventurous, I think.
And both being teachers, it kind of allowed us the time off the summers, the 3 reasons you're a teacher, June, July, and August. But it allowed us the time off to do adventures, both before we were married, or excuse me, before
kids.
Yeah, before kids, BC, before children. And after the kids,
there.
We just kept going. And we're trying to carry it into grandparenthood too.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I think that we're seeing more and more people embrace this idea of adventures and traveling. And I didn't know, with all the adventures and the people that you're interviewing for your podcast, are you seeing that there are more baby boomers, more Gen X people embracing travel than maybe you've thought about or seen in previous generations?
If you go by any of our guests, I would say that a lot of them do travel with their grandkids, because we've seen that. I mean, we've had, we always talk about, there's a grandparents that we interviewed that camp with their grandchildren. We have another one that take their kids, on trips with them, they fly them somewhere. I think there's a lot of that, that's happening.
Well, and a lot of our age people are seeing that, our kids are working, and they might only get the 2 weeks of vacation a year, but, we're retired and the kids got summer off. And so you can grab the kids and do adventures with them, which we're not to that phase yet, but I'm sure we will be someday.
And one of the things that seems to be really popular now that you alluded to is this idea of skip gen travel, or skip generation travel, which is grandparents and grandkids going out and the parents are back at home. Is that the case, that you're seeing more and more of this grandparent-grandchild connections?
I think we're doing both. That's nothing new to me. I actually, when I was 12, my grandparents took me and a cousin for a week in the Ozarks, just us. So I grew up with that. My grandparents, Emma and Bill, they took every grandchild on a vacation, and that was back in the 70s. So that was pretty cool. You went with grandma. You had to stay in the same hotel room and they both snored. It was horrible. But, it was, I saw things, it was like being on your own, because you got to do things with grandma and grandpa that you never got, like to have ice cream for breakfast, I mean, your parents would never allow you to do that. But I think that a lot of grandparent travel happens.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to keep doing that. And I think, too, one of it is that we can afford to do it now. Maybe we couldn't afford to do as much of it earlier when they were kids, but now they're kids. We can take a little bit more.
And my grandparents on the other side of that scale, they bought a resort in Minnesota, and it was just a family-only resort. And so all the kids and all the grandkids from that side of the family would cycle in and out of this resort. Grandma and grandpa stayed there the whole summer and just had a great time with them.
Oh, that sounds like a blast.
That was a very good, for me, being married in that family. That's a very good learning experience, seeing how you can vacation with your kids and your grandkids. I just thought, I want to do that. And we have done that now. We've taken our kids to Minnesota with their, to be up there. Now, our granddaughter hasn't been up there yet, but it'll happen.
It'll happen.
Do you find that there's a lot of, not only is it the grandparents kind of taking the grandkids out and the grandkids are having fun wherever they're at and, hotel swimming pools or the lake or whatever, but do you find that maybe the grandparents are getting a lot out of it too, maybe more emotionally than, the adventure part of it?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. It keeps you young, hanging around with younger kids. It keeps you young. The kids keep going and going in the afternoon, and the grandparents, will all take a nap from 1 to 2. You can take a nap from 2 to 3, and the other one has to stay with the grandkids. I'm sure a lot of that's happening.
I think we're going to need them in the future just to help us keep updated with technology. It's like, okay, bring the grandkids so we'll know how to use our phones.
Right.
When I remember something very similar with my grandparents, as my grandfather really got into the VHS recorders.
Oh, yeah.
And once they had the VHS machines, it was the grandkids' job to make sure if there had been a power outage, to reset the clock on the VCR, and then to also, show the little options that those cameras could have. I mean, it's easy enough to put a cassette in, point it, hit record, but then be able to know like, oh, hey, you can actually open up the aperture a little bit more for some more daylight if you need it.
Yeah.
We never got that lesson. We're still working on cell phones.
Now, one of the things that I really enjoy as well is just getting this idea of being out and active. We think of, I'm going to hit retirement and then I'm going to maybe go on a cruise, maybe do something, but you guys have actually been out and really physically active. I mean, there's pictures on your website of you all out there doing some kayaking and doing some different hiking and doing some different things. And how do you feel that helps to keep you both physically fit, but also emotionally fit in working on your relationship together?
Yeah, I think that's very important. It helps keep us young, keep us in shape. The number one advice we give retired people or people thinking about being retired is watch your health. We all know that stuff happens and there's nothing you can do anything about it. But if you can get out there and have these little adventures, it's going to help you. And yeah, your grandchildren see that. Oh, wow, grandma and grandpa. Because my grandparents, all of them were old by the time I came along, because I'm the youngest of the youngest. And so they were always old. But they did adventures when they were younger, I'm pretty sure.
Well, and I think you're right about that as far as keeping active and keeping yourself to where you've got some physical goals that you're trying to get to. Even if it's just a matter of hiking, like, oh, I want to do this 5-mile loop trail around, Mount St. Helens or something along those lines. Well, there is a certain amount of physical fitness that comes along with being able to do that. And so I imagine during, let's call it the off season or in between adventures, there's a little bit of like, hey, I'm going to go to the YMCA. I'm going to walk the neighborhood. I'm going to do these different things. And if you don't have that adventure, I'm not sure that you're as motivated to stay in shape.
That's true. I mean, she's better at sitting and watching TV than I am. I think I'm a little, I don't know, they didn't have ADD when I was growing up, but I'm pretty sure I'm it. And yeah, I think those things, those little adventures help us stay in shape for the bigger adventures.
Oh, sure.
Whatever they can be.
Sure. With your podcast and the people that you talk to, do you find that you have people that are really planning, let's say, one big adventure with the grandchildren? What I mean by that is, 100-something years ago, there used to be this idea of the grand tour of Europe, or maybe even the States. Like, we're going to go to New York, we're going to see all the museums, we're going to go to DC. Do do you find that people still plan like a big adventure and then it's filled in with little adventures, or do you find that it's a matter of quality or quantity that comes into play?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, a lot of the people that we interview on AdventuRetired are not doing adventures with their grandparent or with their grandchildren, but they are doing big adventures, and we talk to them about that, but they're also doing the little adventures. Like we've talked to people who, besides other stuff they do in their life, they specialize in like cleaning up ditches, trash. And other people, we talk about how they're downsizing their home and stuff like that.
We just had, just this last week, a couple that was one of our guests that came through and looked us up and stayed with us. And they're in their late, almost, he's going to be 80 next year. They're doing a 7,000-mile trip in a car.
Wow.
And
they're 78 and 79.
And they're just driving all over the United States.
Visiting friends and
relatives.
Yeah, it's not so much a
grand adventure.
Well, it's not so much sightseeing, but it's people seeing. They're kind of going from friend to family to friend to family. And I think that's wonderful. At their age, they might consider this the last big road trip.
Well, and that brings up a good point, too, is that not everything has to be doing skydiving when you turn 80 years old or something along those lines. It's the little adventures, the ones in the state park that's close to you, or even just trying something different. Maybe you rent an RV and you go to a state park in the neighboring state or something along those lines.
Yeah, and those would be the great ones for grandparents to do with their grandchildren. You can have adventures in your own backyard. That's not a problem. But, the fact that you got to do them, you don't just say, oh, we should, we ought, I wish I would have. You got to get out there and do the things.
Oh, sure. And what are some of the big examples that you've seen and have come across where people have had an opportunity to balance those things out, or even, let's say, scale up? Maybe they hadn't thought about being adventurous before, but then they started the little adventures and moved up.
Well, one of the things that's kind of popular up here with some of our friends that we've known, and they're not ones to do a lot of big adventures, is just going up to like the Twins ball game, going up to a pro game and renting a box for their family. They would have never done that with their kids when they were younger.
Right.
But now that they have grandchildren, they go up there and
more money.
Yeah, more money. And it's an adventure. It's the weekend, and then spend the weekend at a hotel, that has a pool. So the kids get to enjoy that. The grandkids get to enjoy that. That's something I've seen that's happens more around here.
Yeah. Or a little bit bigger camping trips with your grandkids. If you want to start them out young, you go to the local county park and, build the fire and make the s'mores and all that. And then, as they get older, you can get them away from mom and dad for a couple more days. I don't know how long you'd want to travel with your grandchildren, but
I think another thing too that I learned when I was on a board for some Bible camps when we lived in Texas. And one of the things that I learned from somebody that was a grandparent there was every single year, he and his wife, they were the ones that paid for camp for their grandkids. And I told Curt, we didn't have grandchildren at that time. In fact, our kids were just in college. I said, when we have grandkids and they're at the camp age, you and I are doing that. When we went to camp, it was like $60 for a week. It's like $500 now, $400 or $500 for a week at camp. And I thought, if it's not Bible camp, if it's baseball camp, or if it's, scouting camp, I want to be the grandparent. I want to be able to say, hey, you want to go to camp? We can afford it this year. Mom and dad, I think that's something we want to do, because that was a great learning experience for both of us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and that's a great point too, in terms of being able to share that sense of adventure, model it a little bit, and then you're also starting to convey that sense to the grandkids and even the adult children, right? Because part of this is like, hey, another 20 or 30 years when you're in our shoes,
right,
here's some things that you can do with your grandkids.
That's exactly right. And we're also the type of grandparents that we want to be the ones, not to say that our Sonny's other grandma isn't like this, and I don't mean it that way, but we want to be the type of grandparents that don't focus all about the present giving. We aren't even that way now. We're more to like
experiences over
experience
things.
over a present under the Christmas tree. Yeah, there's always presents and all that, but I don't want to just be the grandma that gives 35 presents, and all plastic. We're always out picking up trash and recycling stuff. That's just totally not who we are.
Yeah.
And so I just, looking for cool adventures to give as presents is a cool thing to me.
Memories,
I think
not
the memories.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point because, and this is a little bit of looking backwards too, but the generations of our parents and even our grandparents coming up through Depression, the World Wars and things, they didn't have much, as a whole, right? So when we entered the post-war boom and the U.S. was really the only economy still functioning for a while, all of a sudden we had all this material wealth that they didn't have when they were growing up. So I think we all experienced grandparents, by and large, aunts, uncles, and even parents, almost going overboard with things versus experience. And I find now when I'm talking with other people, experience tends to be much more important than things. I mean, things are fun, but there's a limit. And I think we've all got that same idea that I would rather go spend a quiet moment looking over a lake with my grandson, talking about everything and nothing, and that he has that memory versus does he really need 20 more Matchbox cars?
Right. But to defend the older generation, like I said, they didn't have the money, and now some of them have it, but they're still very tight with their money. And I get it. They saw their parents lose everything, and they know what it's like to truly be hungry, where we don't and our kids don't. We've been blessed with what we have.
I don't know about you, but my grandparents, my grandparents, it was never like that. We always got one gift, and that was it, and you were fine with that. My one grandparents even never gave us gifts. It was always like however old you are, the dollar bill. So if you were 8, you got $8. If you were 10, you got 10. It was like, wow, and I loved it. It was fine. There was nothing wrong with that. And I think that I think our generation, we overdid it, and you always tell me I overdid it. And I know I did. when the kids were growing up, and now I see, I don't need souvenirs. I just want pictures and memories, it's just, there's a lot of stuff in our houses, and we're getting to that age now that we're grandparents that we're starting to think, what are we going to do with all this stuff?
That's a whole nother subject.
Yep. No, and I think you're right about that in terms of being able to balance in finding that balance, right? Because there, on one hand, when we see, I think, grandkids or even our kids when we're parents and we're walking down the aisles and they're like, oh, I want this. A lot of times the natural thing, I think, is we want to satisfy that, and we want to make the kids happy because we could, but then we've also got to balance out, the need and what's going on with that. Because even with a 5-year-old grandson, I know sometimes when we give them a gift, it's like in about a year, mom's going to thin that closet out and this thing's going to go away.
And I bet if you ask that grandboy if he'd rather have that plastic toy or spend a day fishing, just you and him, he would say fishing, Grandpa. They love spending time. As a teacher, I saw that kids love when parents and grandparents spend time with them.
Show up at school and stuff like that.
It's so important. And that's the type of grandma I want to be. I want to, And that's going to be really hard for us because we live so far away from our only grandchild. And I've told Curt, we're going to have another house down there. I don't know how, but we're going to have one because
I haven't figured that one out.
I'm
Yeah.
going to be down there more, you know?
Well, I'm in a similar situation. I'm in Atlanta. I've got a son that's in Wilmington, North Carolina now, and one in Northern Virginia. And, I've been being put on notice for the last few years that at some point we're going to have to figure out the halfway points about Raleigh-Durham.
Right.
And so, my wife Karen is already kind of like, hey, we should probably be about here because it's about 3 hours this way and about 4 hours that way. And that brings us a lot closer than Atlanta to those locations.
Yeah. But on the other side of that too, we have friends that live by the lake here, and they had a house. Their kids were moving somewhere else, so they moved there. And then the kids' jobs took them somewhere else, and now they're stuck in this place that they really were only there for the grandchildren. So they said, to heck with it. We're moving to the lake, and if kids want to see us, that's where we'll be. So.
Oh, sure.
The door swings both ways there.
It's just hard.
Yeah, that's the other thing is been wanting to make sure that wherever the kids are, that they're kind of settled in. Because to your point, it's be like, hey, great, we moved up to Virginia. Now the kids have moved off to, wherever.
Right.
It's like,
now they're back in Atlanta.
Right. It's like wherever we go, we better like where we're at.
Yeah, that's true.
But I think there is something about having grandma and grandpa away, because my grandfather was in Eastern Oregon, a wheat farmer. I did a lot of my growing up in the D.C. area. And so even just the air travel back to Boise, Idaho, and then the hour-long car ride over to the grandfather's, that was an adventure of itself. Traveling in the air during the 80s, which we didn't do very often, but just the airport for like a young kid that's navigating and looking at the signs and, having dad kind of coach you up on navigating through an airport. That was a pretty cool adventure, being able to make those flights every once in a while.
I'm sure.
Yeah. We had a family reunion a couple of years ago on my father's side. And we grew up right by my grandpa. I mean, he was a quarter mile down the road. And I got to see some of my cousins from out east. Well, they're East Coast when they were growing up, but now they're East Coast and West Coast. And they came back to the farm and they said, coming here to see you guys and grandpa were some of our best vacations ever. And they, we're like, oh, okay, well, we grew up at this place. We didn't think it was all that, but they thought it was Disneyland, I guess. I don't know.
Playing in the barn.
Yeah, playing in the barn.
Yeah. I mean, I was that city kid that showed up on my grandpa's farm and thought it was magical that he had 5 calves out in the pasture getting fat to be sold off at the end of summer. And, driving the tractor around, disking the field and stuff, which is just dirty, awful manual labor with a big old machine. I know that now, but as like a 13-year-old, when he's like, hey, you want to come out and disc, 30 acres and do this? It's like, oh, yeah, this is the best thing ever, right?
Yeah.
We've always threatened our daughters. We should have had them when they were growing up walk the fields the way we did. And we never did. Probably they don't understand it.
Yeah, but that's also one of those cool things that you can share with your granddaughter is being able to do some of those things, even if it's not your farm, right? It's like if you're in the country and you're just happen to be able to walk down a country road and start to share some of these things about, hey, this is where you have to do your irrigation pipes, and these are some of the things you have to look for, and walk in the fields looking for those gophers and, setting the gopher traps and doing some of those things.
Yeah, that's neat stuff.
What are some ideas or what's some suggestions that you might have for grandparents that maybe haven't been super adventurous in their lives, but like the idea of maybe packing up an RV and taking off with the kids, but there's that barrier of like, I haven't done this before. And what are some things that you guys might suggest for grandparents that want to start to become more adventurous?
I guess for me, I would tell them to start with short vacations, maybe a weekend, maybe
in a Holiday Inn or something like that.
But, and you don't have to go out and buy an RV. Find somebody that has a tent, We still tent. We had RVs and our campers, but we have a tent now. We're 60s and we have a tent and sleeping on the ground. But because it's so much easier, you can put it in the car and go, and you don't have to spend a lot of money on it. I think something like that. I think just, looking at what your community or something that has, like this weekend, there were sweet corn days where we're from, is there something cool you can do that, come into town and we'll go to do sweet corn days. There's a parade. And then there is there's a street dance and there's vendors and stuff like that. Find out the little areas that have festivals and things like that you're not totally by yourself. So you have your grandkids and you can actually be walking around and looking and doing things like that.
Mm-hmm.
We like the adventure type. I'm more of a wuss than Curt. He wants to do whitewater rafting and I'm kind of like, I'll be the one person that falls out, and he's like, yeah, but I can swim better, and all that. I don't know. There's a lot of things you can do. I think there's a lot.
Our daughter with her new daughter, Sunny, her and her husband are both adventurous, kind of like us. Both my daughters are. And they said, well, we want to raise Sunny to be adventurous. So that's why, as soon as we found out they were pregnant, she had the baby in January. In June, when she was like 5 weeks old, the little one had a passport and we went to Mexico. In June. So it wasn't all inclusive, which was, we did a VRBO, which was kind of nice. But I said, we got 5 adults here and we got one little baby. We can do this 5 on 1. And it worked well. It really did,
Try taking a vacation and, include the kids, and then you have a little bit of a help, the first couple of times if you need, I guess if you think that you want to vacation with your kids or grandkids and do adventures, maybe do a couple with their parents too, so that you have somebody to tag team with a little bit, and you that way you have a little bit of help too.
Right.
And one of the things too that I'd love to hear about is, what are some of the interesting stories? Maybe share one from your podcast about somebody going off and doing an adventure.
It's so many.
Yeah.
I know it's a tough one.
How about, what do you think about your favorite? Do you have a favorite?
I mean, listening to people go off on these once in a lifetime trips of African safaris and all that.
I actually,
so many.
And Curtis referred to it already, is I love, and I still became just Facebook friends with this lady out east, but she does, she takes walks every day and picks up trash.
Yeah. We
do that. And, there's so many people out there that walk and don't do that. They just walk right by trash when they're walking. So that to me is, we've actually found some cool things when we picked up trash before. And it's like, oh, wow, look.
I found a crescent wrench.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing what, sometimes you can find some cool things or you can find some really gross things, but it's fun.
But yeah, we've done so many, and we don't want to focus our podcast just on trips. We're hobbies. I thought one that we talked about was really cool is this guy and his wife took a Kansas City barbecue judging test, and then they would go around to these little towns and be the judges. Yeah. And he said, we don't get paid, but we walk away with like 10 pounds of world-class barbecue every time, and loved it. Thought it was a great idea. That's something pretty much anybody could do.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Well, how cool would that be for a little boy, a little girl to be talking in class about, my grandparents are barbecue judges?
Right.
How unusual is that?
Yeah. Well, and that would be cool for your grandkids. You would be the cool grandparents if your grandkid did brag about you in class like that. I would hope that my granddaughter, or however many come along, would say, yeah, my grandpa's an old fuddy-duddy. Because I will be a fuddy-duddy someday, but I'm hoping it's not for a while.
But not yet. Yeah. I do want to pivot over a little bit and talk about your podcast and talk about how the idea for your podcast got started and how AdventuRetired really started to come into being.
Okay. Well, we
right before the pandemic, we were going to Houston.
Yeah, we were going to Houston to visit our daughter, no granddaughter yet. And we like podcasts for one thing. They, the radio gets a little boring. And so we started looking for a podcast on Croatia. Yeah, we were going to go to Croatia, which we're finally going to go to now this fall. Yeah. The only thing we could find was a bunch of millennials talking about it. And,
it's all about beer.
Yeah, where are the best beer and coffee and this and that. And we're like, and then we were at one place and a buddy of mine says, well, you should do your own podcast. And I thought this was way out of our wheelhouse because, But we looked into it and we decided, we could do that. And we think we got a niche that the only problem with our niche is a lot of people our age, baby boomers, don't really know what podcasts are. I would venture to say that half of our guests that we've interviewed over the 4 years have never listened to a podcast.
Until us.
Yeah.
And then we had to show them how.
Yeah, we had to show them how.
We come from the age, like when we went to Alaska, you get a milepost. Do you even know, do you know what a milepost book is, right?
Yeah.
Greg?
Yeah.
Okay. And like the other day I was talking to my daughter, I said, well, there's got to be a book, something like that we can read and research about that. And she's like, Mom, there's an app about that, And I'm like, okay. But so we're the type that like to do research. So if we're going to go somewhere, I want to know, what do I need to see? Because there's going to be some cool things that I want to see. And where do I want to stay? Which city is best and all that. And that's what a podcast, that our podcast does. Kind of, it talks about the adventure that the person's on, and it kind of gives you a little synopsis of how to do that yourself.
And we were trying to inspire people too.
Yeah.
Get out there. That trip to Iceland isn't beyond you. You can do those things.
Right. And to do it now, because as you're retired, both of us have lost our dads when they were very, very young. Just retired, both of them in their early 60s. My dad was in his early 60s. We found out he was dying. His dad was in his middle 60s. But we had friends that we worked with that never made it to retirement. They had terrible accidents or heart attacks or something.
Cancer.
Before retirement. And I just, I want to live some of my life and enjoy it in retirement without having to worry about that.
And I think too and we talked about this earlier in the podcast, is being able to have that thing that you're working on, have that thing to be, what's the next thing for us to do? Because I think as we grow older and if you don't have that, then you start to lose purpose. You start to lose some of the meaning. You start to lose some of these things to keep looking forward to.
Yeah.
Which is it's not good for anybody. Everybody ought to have a carrot that you're chasing after. And once you
That's
get that,
kind of what I was thinking.
We just
where's the next?
Did our birthday trip that we're starting a new tradition because we have birthdays within 3 days of each other, and so we're going on a birthday trip. And when we were going on the birthday trip, we're already planning the next year's, because that's the fun of it, is the planning,
the dangling the carrot. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
But she teases me in that sometimes I'll have 2 and 3 lined up, and she's like, let's get done with one before we do the other. And I'm like, well, or she wants to stay around here for a little while. And we're actually staying here for about, 6-7 weeks. So
it's kind of nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you guys were telling me too, is that you're starting to make the plans where you're going to go down to Houston first and see the granddaughter, and then being able to fly out of Houston or making that part of the trip.
Well. Yeah. I think that was like a halo experience to come on. It's like, why are we flying out of Omaha? Yeah, it's 4 hours away. Houston's, 2
17.
days. But, we enjoy being in the car together. There's no reason why we can't be 2 days down there. And then we actually have time with our grandbaby, and then
that's the big influence there.
Yeah, and Houston's a bigger airport anyway, and you can, why not? Why not? If you can do it, let's do it.
Oh, sure. Well, and as she gets older too, I'm just thinking that what a great experience and role model it is that, hey, Grandpa and Grandma are coming down here. They're visiting with me. They're taking off and going somewhere. Maybe it's Croatia. Maybe it's South Africa on a safari. Maybe it's somewhere else. But then when they're coming back through, it's a little bit of a trip report. It's like, hey, here's this huge, big, wide world for you, granddaughter. Sonny, right?
Right.
And yeah, hey, Sonny, it's a big, wide world. Don't think that you're limited to whatever the town or city that you're in.
That's right.
I'm sure with her parents, she'll know that though. Her parents,
but they
like to go too, so that's wonderful.
We can be the experience at show and tell. Grandma and Grandpa are here for show and tell.
Oh, sure.
What do they bring in us?
Yeah, a couple of the souvenirs. I think back in the day, I think I might have had a boomerang around the house from somebody's trip to Australia or something like that.
I bet a lot of windows got broke with that.
Oh, yeah. Well, we didn't need a boomerang to break windows.
That's right, I'm sure.
There's a lot of baseballs and soccer balls and everything else. Well, Curt and Cindy, I've had you on for a while. I've enjoyed this conversation. Is there anything about AdventuRetired or adventures in general that I haven't asked you that you would like to bring up?
Don't be afraid to try one.
Right.
I can't tell you how many times Curt has pushed me out of my box and I wasn't going to do something and he said, all right, you don't have to, but I'm going to do it. Well, that's right there is a challenge that I can't put down, so I'm going to do it too. Might not be happy, but then I'm always so happy I got it done, so yeah, don't be afraid to try an adventure. I think especially if it involves your family, it's even the icing on the top.
And there is a point when we won't be able to do what we're doing, and that's fine. What was it? A friend of mine posted on Facebook. She says, I see all these old people zip lining and jumping out of airplanes. She goes, I'm thrilled if I can get my sock on without falling over. Those days are coming. I understand that, but we want to do things while we can, and we want to encourage people, of our age or older or younger to do things while they can.
Oh, sure. Well, and that's great advice. Where's the best place for people to connect with you and subscribe to the podcast?
Yeah, we have a website, AdventuRetired, all one word, .com, or they can email us at adventureretired@gmail.com if they have an adventure they want to, talk about. They can listen to everything on the website or just wherever you get your podcast. Just search AdventuRetired, and we're there.
Yeah, we have a lot, 4 years of episodes, so
yeah,
there's a lot of different themes. Every episode's a different theme.
We're always looking for different ones.
Oh, sure. And folks, if you're out driving around or on a walk or whatnot, we'll be sure to put links to everything we talked about into the show notes. So if you don't have something to write down with right now, you can just go to the show notes for this episode and you'll be able to find the links to connect with Curt and Cindy. Thank you two so much for spending your afternoon with me, and I've enjoyed this conversation very much.
Well, we appreciate it. Thank you, Greg.
You got a great podcast going too, Greg, and I can tell you just love being a granddad.
Absolutely.
That's wonderful. It is wonderful.
It's a good badge to wear.
Oh, thank you. What a fun conversation with Cindy and Curt. I really enjoyed listening to their stories about how their families have used adventures, have used different types of activities to build stronger family units. I loved the example they had of an adventure that could be going into Minneapolis and being able to go to a Twins game and get a hotel, splash around with the kids and the grandkids in the pool, and check out the downtown area as part of a long weekend with a really enjoyable activity. We don't always have to have adventures to hike up to the top of, a mountain or go through, the swamps of Florida or whatever that is. Those are all fun, but I think the most important thing is having that spirit of adventure, that mindset of doing something extraordinary that is more focused on the activity and building memories and building those connections. I hope you got a lot out of this, and I hope you share this with somebody that could really enjoy listening to Curt and Cindy talk about adventures. So until next time, remember to stay cool. Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.